Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 534.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because you have heard me say it before, and I'm going to say it again. Where you start isn't necessarily where you stay. In fact, today's guest is a great example that when you go and get started somewhere, you may grow, you may change, you may become bigger, better, badder than you originally intended and end up in a place you may not have originally predicted. I have with me someone today who has been in business 45 years in the Las Vegas area, originally from New York, but most importantly, has started or purchased 20 businesses. Now, that's kind of interesting to me because many of us, we're hoping to get the first one, or maybe you're on your second, maybe your third. But 20 says to me that there's a lot of information that we're going to be able to learn about getting started, staying started, following through, building the team, because this individual also served us in the United States Marine Corps. So I know that there are a number of lessons that we're going to be able to learn. At this point, you're probably wondering who you're talking about. Well, I am talking about none other than Ron Quarry. He's recently written a book entitled Tenacity. Now, you guys know me. You know I already like the title simply because of that one word. It's a lot of what it takes for you and I to get to where we want to go, especially when we know we have to go through a number of things as well. So here's what's going to happen today. We're going to hear his story. We're going to find out those lessons of how we can continue to build our cash flow, build our businesses, and most importantly, learn from his journey of what it's going to take for us to become the biggest, baddest versions of ourselves. So, with that being said, help me get ready to welcome, listen, learn, and love Ron Quarry. Ron, how you doing?
Hello, Jay. Thank you so much for having me on your show today.
I'm glad that you are here. Now, this being the first time that you're here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes, like Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. Because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, occasionally I can envision myself running around town, possibly with capes and tights, using our products and services, saving customers one at a time. Also, like a superhero, though, an entrepreneur has a beginning. For example, if you think about Spider-Man, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, taking some photos, hoping to get Mary Jane on a date. That's it. And then one day he gets bit by a spider, discovers he's got a superhuman ability, and now he has to choose whether to use this newfound power for good or for evil. So, my question to you is as follows. Before your 20 businesses, before even being in the military, maybe even before you left Brooklyn, New York, what we want to know is who is Ron Quarry?
Wow. Well, I'd like to say that that question makes me go back to when I was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. I was attending a small Brooklyn, typical parochial school back in the 1960s, white shirt, tie, shine shoes. At 12 years old, my Christmas gift from my mom and dad was an old wooden shoe shine box. And I think something that goes right to your question is not only did I use it to make sure the nuns didn't swat my hand that morning for unshined shoes, but I started getting up an hour early, going down to the corner subway stop and shining shoes for 10 cents a shine before school started that morning. And earning my own money that young in life made me a believer that if you can find a need or a niche for something you can do that either isn't being done or you can do it better than someone else, you need to take a shot. Just as I earned my own money at 12, throughout life, I followed that perceived feeling about myself as a niche finder, and through my career, found different things in those 20 businesses in a variety of industries that I thought I could do better than someone else. And that's what the genesis of the book is about.
Interesting. Now, I just want to make sure I heard this correctly. You said that they intentionally gave you as a gift a shoe shine box?
Yeah, you needed to go to school with shine shoes. So for Christmas, I got a wooden shoe shine box that would enable me to shine my shoes more efficiently for school.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just making sure that, was that something you asked for, or did they go, oh, I know, this is what he'll like? I mean, whose idea was this shoe shine box?
I didn't grow up with wealthy parents. They were very functionally minded. And while you always got a toy or two for Christmas, you also got things you needed. What kid didn't frown when they opened the wrapped gift and found a shirt?
Right.
And they want the latest toy.
Right.
So my dad thought a shoe shine box would be a good thing for me to have rather than a damp rag to get my shoes ready for school.
Yeah,
so to make the most of it. And a couple of years later, at 16, I was on a typical street corner with the guys that I hung out with, and they decided to start a band. I didn't play an instrument, nor could I hold a tune. So I had to find a place for myself in this new exciting thing that was being created, because one guy played guitar, another drums, another piano. So I said, I'll be the manager. And,
yes.
And we took that to a great new level where I was accepted as the manager. So it became my job to find a place for us to earn money. I was an altar boy in the local church. So I asked the church pastor if we could use the church hall. I ran flyers on a copy machine, put them up around the neighborhood, went to a local beverage distributor, purchased beverages, which we would sell for $1 a can when we were only paying 10 cents a can, filled up the tables around the dance floor with salted treats, pretzels, and popcorn. And for a bunch of guys at 17 years old, we actually made over $3,000 that night. And that really lit a fire in my belly for being in business for myself one day.
Okay, now, for the benefit of those that are listening, some of them just said $3,000, that's not a lot. Can you give us some context of when this was so that they can really understand that it probably was a whole lot more than what we might think it is today?
Oh, absolutely. I was 17 years old, so that was the late 60s, and $3,000 was a large amount of money.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I can't even imagine in your head, oh my God, if I can do this, what else could I do? That's interesting to me. Okay. So take me on this journey, if you will. I mean, obviously today you've been through a number of different businesses, but what I'm curious to know is how did that transform? How did that get started? What was typically what I like to call that spider bite moment, that moment where you wake up and go, you know what? I've got something special that I can use and provide value to other people. And that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Well, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work in Las Vegas as a casino dealer.
Oh, okay. Hold on. This was after. So it was after the Marine Corps. Then let me back up then. What inspired you to go in the Marine Corps?
Well, a lot of your listeners won't remember the draft, but there was a time when the draft existed and you were determined to be draft worthy based on your birth date. They would pull numbers, and I drew a low number that year, number 26, which meant I was likely to be drafted if I lost my student deferment. Well, you kept a student deferment in college if you carried over 12 credits, which I always did. there was a class that I wasn't enjoying, so I dropped it, not knowing dropping the class would make me eligible to be drafted. At the time, the Vietnam War was going on, so anyone who got drafted was headed to Vietnam. Rather than getting drafted and being assigned to a random selection of the branches of the military, I felt that if I enlisted in the Marine Corps, where I felt there was more training, I would enhance the likelihood of my survival in war. So that's why I enlisted in the Marine Corps. That ended up at just prior to graduation, while I had orders for Vietnam, President Nixon at the time announced de-escalation, which meant no one else would go to Vietnam and so many thousand per month would be pulled out. So prior to being shipped off to war, I ended up trained for Vietnam but not going, ended up being stationed in California, which was a 2-hour drive from Las Vegas. And that's how I got into the Marine Corps. And that's how I ended up in Las Vegas after the Marine Corps.
Was that, I'm just curious, was that Camp Pendleton?
Well, Camp Pendleton was where we had advanced infantry training. It started in boot camp in MCRD in San Diego.
Got it.
After 3 months of regular boot camp, you go to advanced infantry training in Camp Pendleton, and then you get assigned to anywhere in the world they decided to send you. I ended up in Barstow, California, which is a major supply center, and came to Las Vegas on weekends where I had some relatives, could count on some good home-cooked meals, and enjoyed weekends off the base, and enjoyed a very young, vibrant Las Vegas so much in 1972 and 3 that I decided to move here rather than go back to New York when I got out and give it a shot.
Okay, so this brings up a really interesting question for me then. There's a lot of individuals who are listening who maybe they had flashes of, oh, I could be an entrepreneur. Maybe they weren't shining shoes or managing a band, but maybe they had the lemonade stand or they were selling candy at school. They did something. But usually there's this intervening event, and there's this intervening event, and what happened is that they got trained in a completely different discipline, say, when they went through college, and in your case, through college and the Marine Corps, and they lose that spark. They lose that desire to actually make something happen. How did you maintain that? Because you're saying that after you got out of the military, you still had that entrepreneurial fire and wanted to do something with it.
Well, as a dealer, I ended up at the Tropicana Hotel. And as I stood on the various tables, I ended up dealing all 4 games: blackjack, roulette, baccarat, and craps. And as I would stand on a dead game, I would think about the fact that I would like to find a way to earn money, whether I was able physically to go to work or not. I had a strong history of cancer in my family. I always felt like cancer would find me. It wasn't a matter of if, it was more when. And I wondered what would happen as I was beginning to start a family if I couldn't go to work every day. So I wanted to be in business for myself. And I wondered what could I do, because I really didn't have a surplus of funds. I was making good money, but I was paying bills and there wasn't much left over every month. So after dealing for about 4 years, I decided, well, I could become a realtor. I could sell real estate during the day, deal at night, make some extra money, and use it to buy a business. And that's exactly what I did. And with that extra money, it gave me the opportunity to succeed as a realtor. And in 1979, purchased my first tavern.
Did you say tavern?
Yes, it was a neighborhood tavern, a drinking place. And if you think about it, someone who doesn't really have a skill like a doctor or a lawyer's shingle, what could you actually go into? And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I thought, well, the Marine Corps gave me the training to run a tight ship, make sure it was a friendly place. In fact, I like to say that the first bar that I purchased was Cheers before Cheers was a TV show, before it was even a concept.
Yeah.
I thought I could run a place where everybody knows your name, fill it with people, make them feel comfortable, give them good service, keep the place clean, and run a successful tavern. And that's exactly what happened in 1979. And for a short period of time, I wasn't sure if the tavern would enable me to support my then wife and 1-year-old son. So I kept my dealing job, I kept my realtor job, and I ran the bar at whatever free hours there were in a 24-hour period. After 6 months of doing all of those things, I was comfortable enough quitting the dealing job. And ultimately, the bar business would transform, which my book, Tenacity, goes into more detail. We went from being a drinking and eating establishment to a gaming establishment. And that occurred in the 1980s with the advent of interactive gaming, when a gentleman named Cy Red invented video poker. The traditional slot machines that lined up sevens and cherries that most bars in neighborhoods didn't have a great interest from your players, but they did love the idea of interactive gaming and playing video poker. And I found that where at one time 90% of my revenue came from selling drinks, that actually transformed to where 70 to 80% of my revenue became gaming revenue. And neighborhood bars became gaming establishments.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, wow, there's a number of things that I'm hearing, and that's what I like about an entrepreneur's journey, is that, well, first, there's something I actually have to ask. You mentioned that you were able to get to a point where you were able to ask what I consider to be a very important question. You're like, what happens if I can't work every day? And there's a lot of people who don't ask that question until they can't work every day. And I'm curious to know how you had the wisdom to ask it early, so early, long before there was ever an issue. Like, and then not just ask it, but do something about it. Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, CashFlowDiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, Jay, I watched my dad lose 3 brothers to cancer and his sister to cancer. My dad fought colon cancer in the 60s and survived it. And that motivated me to think outside the box. I got married in 1975, had a son in 1978. We planned on growing our family. And I just think rational thought brought me to the point, how do I make my wife and my car payment? How do I make my house payment if I cannot go to work and keep earning? And having a successful business that would send money to the bottom line, whether I show up or not, was a very plausible conclusion.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Now, when it comes to starting a business, there are a number of, we'll call them obstacles or challenges, or just things that the owner or business owner, entrepreneur is not used to dealing with that they suddenly have to deal with. For example, maybe it could be something as simple as, taxes and whatnot. That changes, let alone all the paperwork that goes along with it. But you're in business in a city that's known for lots of extra challenges when it comes to just either being in the business or even the type of business that it is out there in Vegas. And I'm curious to know, what were some of those, we'll call them obstacles, that you had to, that for lack of a better way of putting it, you didn't know they were coming, but when they came, you were like, uh-oh, I've got to deal with this.
Well, yeah, certainly everybody who takes a shot is going to encounter obstacles they could not anticipate. And I believe that the tradition of the Marine Corps, which is failure is not an option, instilled in me an ability and a willingness to not accept defeat easily. So when obstacles befell me, I thought hard and long about how to battle them. Some such obstacles you've asked about. One example, which my book describes in an entire chapter, is in the 1980s, I thought I could operate a better limousine company than everyone in town that was doing it. I was told, you cannot break into the transportation business. No one has been given a certificate in 2 decades. And you couldn't operate a charter limousine company without a certificate from the state. And I didn't take that well. If I could show a need and necessity for what I could provide, and if I could do a better job of it, there would be a place for it. And luckily, my neighborhood tavern was filled with drivers and employees from the 2 existing limousine companies. And I learned some interesting things about how busy they were and when their busy times were. So I was able to engage in a polling effort wherein I documented calls for service and the frequency I was told that there were no cars available. And when I appeared before the state commission that issued certificates, and I could show that 90% of the time there were no cars available, my opponents could not successfully argue that there wasn't a need for an additional company. Thankfully, when I was under oath and testifying, no one asked, how did I select what times I called for service, when I would have had to admit that I knew the times that they were solid. So that was just the strategy I employed that worked out well. And in 1984, I received a certificate to open presidential limousine service, despite the obstacles of getting the certificate, as well as during the hearing process, I encountered death threats, which I dealt with head on, like any good Marine would do. Contacted the person in a one-on-one scenario in an elevator. And I think your listeners will get a kick out of how I persuaded him to stop the death threats, stop the vandalizing of my cars. And if there was any doubt that I didn't have the right guy, the fact that when I released the physical hold I had on him in the elevator, all the threats stopped. And I ultimately prevailed, operated the limousine company for 4 years before selling it and using that money to buy property and build my own neighborhood casino from the ground up.
Okay. So this is this is begging the question. When we look at your resume of everything that you've done, there doesn't seem to be a consistent through line. I mean, we've got limousine service, glass supply company. You're talking about a tavern, real estate, Marine Corps. Why so many different things? Why did that happen? Why do you think that happened for you that way? Why was it not like in a linear fashion where you stayed in a particular vertical or niche or anything like that? I'm just trying to understand what drove it. Was it because people just kept saying, no, you can't do that? And you're like, no, watch me.
Well, I did stay in the tavern business to the extent that I built or purchased 4 of them around the valley, which served a great function when I saw a need for a better limousine company with tuxedoed chauffeurs and stocked bars so that they could stock the bars in the limos at any one of the 4 locations around the Las Vegas Valley. In operating one business, I would see the need for other businesses, and then I would think about whether or not it's something I could do. A friend that I made in the Marine Corps and I were business partners in those early days, and he was a screen printer who silk screened the fronts of slot machines for the manufacturers and for the hotels. Well, when video poker came about and many more companies started getting into the slot manufacturing business, he and I saw a need for an independent screen printing company. So we took his skill, opened Suburban Graphics, and grew that from an initial 4-person operation and a $100,000 SBA loan into a 120-person operation, selling slot machine glass around the country, around the world actually, generating nearly $15 million a year in sales. But all of these things developed by just living life, being an observational entrepreneur, seeing need for something that wasn't being done or something I could do better, and then going after it.
Okay, now you just said something that I think is interesting, is you said being an observational entrepreneur. You see a need, fill a need. Totally get that. But I have to ask, in order for you to accomplish a lot of these things, they overlap. And you ask people today, they're like, man, I can't start a business. I got kids. I got a wife. I got, this, I got that. How on earth did you manage to do all of these things, honestly, simultaneously? That's what it really looks like.
Well, time management is a critical factor to succeeding in anything. And hiring good people is also critical. As I would grow a business, I would generally run a new business myself for a year. Mm-hmm. I would try to keep focus on the things you point out, very important. I've got a family at home.
Right.
So I would make it a point when I'd say over 90% of the time to make it home for dinner, interact with the kids, interact with the wife, and then go back to the bar for the night shift. Be home in the morning to greet the children when they woke up, have breakfast with them, and get on to the workday. So there was a lot of running around involved, but I balanced it, and it had to be done.
So then let me ask you this question. For the benefit of those that are in their entrepreneurial journey right now and they're dealing with these very things, but don't have necessarily the background or the training provided to you by the military, or just, shoe shining at the age of 12, which I still think is awesome. What would you say to someone today who's like trying to, they're building their business, or maybe they're even starting where they have, a full-time job and they're building something on the side and they're trying to make it all work? What would you tell them? How would you counsel them on being able to reconcile everything so that they can still walk away and build something that can work if for someday, they're unable to work?
I would say don't be a self-defeatist. So many people do not pursue their dream because they believe they just can't do it. For example,
Whoa. Say that again, because I think that was good. I want other people to hear that one because they might have missed it.
So many people are self-defeatist. They have a good idea, but they become persuaded either from the input of others or their own thoughts that they just could not do it. So they don't pursue it.
Yeah.
I use a term. You're never going to hit a baseball if you don't swing the bat. Well, you've got to take that shot to see if you could make it happen. And, my partner, Dan, and I didn't have the money to do everything we did at the time we wanted to do it. So rather than just being a self-defeatist saying, well, we don't have the money to buy that bar, so I didn't buy it. Instead of that, as a realtor, I found one of my clients who I sold the property for was netting an amount of money very close to what we needed to make the down payment on that first tavern. So I approached him. Now, a lot of people would say, I'm not going to ask him to loan me that money, but I did. And he loaned me that $35,000, which he was netting from the sale of his condo for a better interest rate than the banks would pay him at the time. And I used that to purchase that first tavern. And the book goes into detail on how we raised the funds for an idea we had and the process of elimination in how we overcame the obstacles that we were confronted with. One such obstacle was that tavern I built with the proceeds from the sale of the limo company. We ended in an outlying jurisdiction. You know, the city of Las Vegas is surrounded by other small cities.
Yeah.
Much like LA, you go from LA proper to Beverly Hills, but all you really did was cross the street. Well,
Right.
It's like that in Vegas. So we went to an outlying jurisdiction that had a more favorable gaming climate where you could have non-restricted gaming without building a hotel. That's why we did it.
That makes sense.
I didn't know that there was a city councilman there who was a competitor of mine in the printing business and who intended to become a competitor in the neighborhood gaming business. He used his power as a councilman,
Of course,
to eliminate me as a competitor by using his small town police department to frame me with multiple criminal charges. Now, the heart of the book goes into great detail on how we overcame those obstacles and the very amusing payback I delivered to him for what he did to me.
So, okay. There's just so many things that you've accomplished in such a very small amount of time. I mean, yeah, 45 years, but still, you've done a lot. And what's going through my head at this particular moment is that there's just got to be like, what is like the ultimate goal? What was there ever some overarching idea that you were trying to achieve? What was the, what does that look like for you? Because I'm just curious at this point.
Well, I think a lot of people might conclude that there's a goal to reach a certain level of wealth or net worth. And that was never even a consideration for me.
Yeah, I don't get that from you. I get like you're just trying to be the best version of yourself, but I'm just curious as to like what would evidence that for you? Because I don't know.
Just looking for a new challenge. When I would start a business and I'd work it for a year or two, I'd build it up as strong as it could be. I'd find good managers to promote from within, to take over the reins, and I would go off to the next project to keep my interest. And that's why I diversified from the 4 taverns into limousines, graphics, glass and mirror cutting and shaping, children's education products, the furniture business. The list goes on and on, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was engaging in challenges that my observational entrepreneurship told me I could do that. I could do it better than it's being done, or in a small town when Las Vegas only had 100,000 residents, you could actually come up with an idea that no one was doing yet.
Right.
Vegas now has 2 million residents, but back in the early 70s, it was a pretty small town where there were a great many more opportunities. And I just love the challenge, to answer your question.
Okay.
The challenge of doing something new, building something from nothing, and being successful at it.
So at this point in your life, in this journey, I'm curious to know, how do you feel about the concept of, mistakes, errors, failures? Because you've tried so many things. I can only imagine not everything has gone the way that you wanted it to. But I'm curious to know, how necessary have you found it? Because, see, there are some people who are listening right now who are doing everything they can to avoid making any mistakes whatsoever.
Oh, you're going to have mistakes, and you just can't let them get the better of you. You're right. And the book describes that I didn't always hit a home run. There was a time when bungee jumping was very popular in this country. And my partner, Dan, and I purchased a 280-foot tall tower crane. We were going to have the tallest bungee jump in the country.
Okay.
And we opened Bungee Fever. It took us 6 months to find the tower crane in Fontana, California, transport it here on 20 flatbeds,
Wow.
and erect it. The week we opened Bungee Fever, there were nationally advertised on the news 3 accidents which crippled the bungee jumping growth curve. Now, those accidents happened on temporary crane facilities. They were not like we were, a fixed structure licensed by the city as a true amusement ride, properly insured. They were temporary rigged facilities. Nonetheless, the news people were saying, well, if you think bungee jumping was safe, think again and watch this video. Well, the video depicted a cord that was rigged by putting multiple cords together. Whereas when you do it right, you pay $20,000 for a cord that's specifically manufactured for your jump height. Nonetheless, we did everything right. The business failed. We lost nearly $500,000, but we didn't let that dissuade us from pursuing the next venture. We licked our wounds. It took us a couple of years to pay back some of what we borrowed to do the deal, and we got on with life and went into another venture a couple of years later.
I love it. So for those that have listened this far and want to find out just more of the lessons that you have available, catch up with what you're doing, what's going to be the best way for them to track you down or maybe even grab a copy of the book?
Well, the book Tenacity is available in 4 versions on Amazon, hardcover, paperback, ebook through Kindle, and interestingly, my audiobook through Audible on Amazon was recorded by Hollywood actor Michael Madsen, who's known for his roles in Donnie Brasco, Reservoir Dogs, and Kill Bill. He's been in over 290 films. He's got a great voice for my persona in the book Tenacity, and they can find the book on Amazon. My last name is spelled Coury. If you enter the name of the title, you'll find multiple books by that name. And they can also go to my book's website, ronquarryauthor.com, where there's a quick link to the Amazon site.
Excellent. Now, as we wind down here, I've got a final question for you because I'm really curious to hear your answer, given your varied experience, etc. Because, here's what I know. There's a number of people who have listened, and listening to you, I know. They got the courage. They're like, you know what? They're drawing that proverbial line in the sand. They're like, that's it. If he can do 20 different businesses, if he can go through that, I'm not dealing with any death threats. I can make this thing happen. And they're at what I like to call that precipice of decision. And like I know, when we get to that point, oftentimes we have a companion, and that companion comes in the form of a voice. And it's a voice that reminds us of, well, you know what happened last time? And you remember why? You remember that great idea you had and how that didn't work? And who are you? You're going to do what? You're going to open what kind of business? Are you sure? I mean, don't you know? Nope, no one's done that in 20 years. And for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time it's going to be different. This time they're going to follow through. This time they're going to do exactly what you say. And they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
Well, live your life by certain guidelines. I like to say there's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And if you have an idea and you have a way to put it together, don't hesitate to share the idea. Bring in some friends and partners who can support you, as Dan supported me when we had a half a dozen operating businesses going on at the same time. And 13 years ago, I learned I had esophageal cancer. I was going to be on my back for over a year after that surgery, if I even survived it. And Dan stayed on the home front as I went to California for surgery at USC Hospital. And by having a good partner that I could trust, who would make the same decisions I would make if I were there, don't let anybody who's listening that wants to do something be afraid of sharing the idea with someone, doing it with someone, and make the right choices. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. Mistakes don't mean you fail. You just adapt and improvise and overcome those obstacles and believe that for you, failure is not an option.
I love it a lot, sir. I love it a lot. It is clear that, I've heard the phrase a lot, once a Marine, always a Marine, and I can still hear it in you in so many ways. And the sheer fact that you have done so many different things and you've done them basically on your own terms, regardless of what anyone else would say. I just want to be one of the first to say thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the CashFlow Diary, sir.
You are very welcome, Jay. It's been a true pleasure getting to know you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean today? Well, it means get over to ronquarryauthor.com. Why? Because you know, like I know, you just learned a whole lot of stuff about, you know what? It doesn't really matter where you start or where you stay. It just matters that you have some tenacity. Go out there and make that happen. Pick up a copy of the book and just remember this one thing. You never are going to hit a baseball if you don't swing the bat. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.